Welcome to CNN Money Switzerland. It is Tuesday, the 2nd of June. I'm Ana Maria Montero with your headlines today. Kicking it off right here in Switzerland, where the Swiss federal government confirmed that borders with Italy will in fact remain closed until further notice. This is in spite of the Italian government lifting its own entry restrictions with its neighboring countries on June 3rd, 2020. For their part, the Swiss believe reciprocating at this date is premature, and for the moment, only people with Swiss nationality and authorization under the law of foreigners, or those whose personal situation makes their entry urgently necessary, will be allowed to come in. As such, shopping tourism also remains prohibited. The Swiss economy, meanwhile, saw an upswing in May after the easing of the coronavirus lockdown, according to the most recent Swiss Purchasing Managers Index. It recovered slightly from post-financial crisis lows reached in April, but remained below the growth threshold as manufacturers are faced with lags in the supply chains and service providers with a drop in activity. The coronavirus pandemic also continues to affect consumer spending, according to retail figures out today. For the second consecutive month, retail sales for Switzerland experienced a drop, this time of 20% in April, compared to this same time last year. And Lufthansa stock, which has nearly halved this year, surged today after Supervisory Board approved a €9 billion government bailout. The rescue package gives the German government a 20% stake in the group, which owns airlines in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Belgium, and 2 seats on its supervisory board. Under a preliminary agreement with the Commission, Lufthansa will transfer 24 takeoff and landing slots at both Frankfurt and Munich airports to other airlines, allowing the German government's bailout to clear the competition regulators' scrutiny. Returning now to Switzerland, the recent launch of the WHO Foundation here in Geneva, during the same week as President Donald Trump's announcement that the U.S. is halting its support of the World Health Organization, has left many asking if this was a knee-jerk reaction to the termination of the inflow of U.S. support, or if, as the WHO claims, it was just a coincidence. Earlier, I spoke to its newly named founder and former Swiss Secretary of Health, Dr. Thomas Zeltner, to find out more. Dr. Zeltner, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss your recently launched WHO Foundation, whose main goal, as I understand it, is to diversify the sources of funding for the organization. Now, the announcement last week by the WHO Director General Tedros, in it, he denied the move was related to recent funding issues, but saying it had been in the works for years. But I mean, come on. The launch of this fund comes just as President Trump on Friday said the U.S. is going to terminate its relationship with the WHO. I mean, is this just a coincidence?
It is, and a coincidence happened, really. We have been
really, Professor, really, it's really a coincidence. I mean, there's nothing else there.
Really. Yeah, we have been working on this project for almost 2 years because. And the idea actually started in an open discussion Dr. Tedros had with collaborators. How can we actually broaden our base? And then he asked me to chair a committee, and we were looking, can we broaden the donor base of WHO? WHO is funded by member states and large foundations these days. But WHO is not funded or has no donors in the general public, major individuals who want to give, and finally corporates. And so the idea came up, let's do what other UN organizations do. Let's get this independent funding agency or organization, and that's what we did.
It's just that, with the withdrawal of the U.S. funding, the foundation couldn't come at a more crucial time for the WHO.
True. I mean, WHO needs the support from many sides. I mean, and that's really what one of the reasons for the foundation is. The foundation wants to be a strong, independent advocate for this organization, as well as for global health in general. And we think that WHO deserves the support not only from member states, but also from the general public, from individuals. And that's the reason why we set up this legal entity in Geneva. And this legal entity should also make it more simple for these, what we call non-traditional donors.
Now, last week, WHO Director, again, Tedros, said the organization had little discretion over the way it spends its funds, almost 80% of its funds. So to what extent does this new foundation go towards addressing this in particular?
We will be supporting WHO by about 70 to 80% of the money we're hoping to get. And 20-30% will go to implementing partners. The money we are donating to WHO is meant to complement the general program of work of WHO, so WHO's priority. And by this money, give WHO more power, more financial strength.
The foundation wants to raise 3 billion Swiss francs by the year 2023. Now, with so much fundraising going on at the moment for COVID-19 efforts, including the WHO Solidarity Response Fund, how confident are you that you will be able to actually meet these targets and source substantial funds from the individual major donors that you're after?
Well, first of all, we really hope that we will get 1 billion. That's our initial goal, 1 billion by 23-24. And what we want really to achieve with that is to add to be part of this 3 billion goal of WHO. And the 3 billion are 1 billion more people who are safe in health emergencies, 1 billion who have access to universal health care, and finally 1 billion people who are in better health and in better health conditions.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the foundation is legally registered and in Geneva, here in Switzerland, and administered by Swiss law. Is this paving the way perhaps for Switzerland to play a bigger role in securing the future of the WHO?
Well, we are certainly very happy to have WHO in Geneva, and we are proud to be the host country. I'm now speaking as a Swiss, we do whatever we can to support WHO in that function.
Coming out of the coronavirus crisis, investors remain focused on their own portfolios, but that won't last long, says Alain, co-founder of Swiss venture capital firm BI Partners. He tells Hannah Wise why he thinks investors need to get out of their comfort zone.
Like it happened in 2000, like it happened in 2008, it will happen again in 2020. A lot of the investors will focus on their own portfolios, make sure that their companies are safe before they go into new ones, etc., etc. So, for sure, there will be a contraction of investments in the startup scene, but I don't think it's going to be a long-lasting one because there's a lot of dry powder in the coffers. I mean, many funds have reserves or have raised new funds. I mean, it will be more difficult. We're lucky to close ours during the pandemic. But
do you think there's too much dry powder out there?
Oh, there's never too much, I think. The question is, how do you use it? I mean, I think intelligently used, there is enough opportunities to use even more money than the one available. Obviously, when you have a little bit, the coffers are a bit too full, then there's a few side effects of that might be expected. But in general, I think the ecosystem in Switzerland is doing well and is reasonably efficient, I would say, in the usage of the funding available.
But you didn't quite hit your 80 million Swiss franc target for your fund.
So we closed at 75. So, I mean, it will be short, but we have a year to top it up. So that we hope that during this year we'll manage to top it up to a bigger number.
And so now we're in a situation where Switzerland is beginning to reopen its economy. How will the startup scene recover? Will it bounce back quickly?
I think that all the youngsters that are populating the staff of the startups are very resilient. I mean, they've adapted in no time to homework because it was already the case for many of them. Many of them were already working often from home or from different premises or different office locations. So I don't think this has been a major deterrent. I think I've even seen a few of my companies where the employees are pretty happy to say we can finally concentrate, we're at home and we can really work on our things rather than be distracted by colleagues' questions and all kind of things around. So I think the major question now is for the CEOs and the management of companies to find the right balance between continuing or encouraging homework versus going in the company. And if there is still a lot of homework, then how do you enforce a company culture? It's very difficult over a video conferencing system to do that. So there will be a challenge going forward to implement that the company cultures, and that's one of the things that the startups should be good at. I mean, some are really good, some are not as good, but the company culture is what makes a difference, makes the people work over hours and be overly efficient. So that is a bit of a challenge that they will be facing.
I mean, the Swiss market isn't really known as being a risk-taking market out there. Do you see that being compounded by the coronavirus crisis, or do you see that that we will be less cautious in the future because of what we've been through when it comes to risk?
I hope we'll be less cautious. I think we are overly cautious. The world of venture capital is not about making a 2-timer or 3-timer on an investment. It's making a 50 or 100-timer on a few, because those are just extraordinary. And to get those kind of extraordinary results takes extraordinary guts and extraordinary decisions that often fail. That must be said. But when they work, they should work really big time. And we've not been very good at in Switzerland. It's maybe the only thing I would say, the only restriction I would put on the Swiss market, on the Swiss venture market. I don't think we've had enough of those extraordinary success stories. It's a solid ecosystem. It's Swiss made. It's solid. It's well thought through, but it doesn't have yet the extraordinary results. So I think.
Why do you think that is, though? I mean, why is that? Is that because of the lack of risk?
I think it's a part of of our culture. I mean, I'm a pure Swiss citizen, so I can talk about it without being biased. I think we tend to be a bit risk averse. We're in a very comfortable country, so why risk everything big time if your life can be decent otherwise? There's probably a mixture of different things, and lack of venture capital mentality. I think it's a different trade. I mean, starting a venture capital company, venture-backed company, is a very different thing than starting your own little mechanical atelier or whatever, which cannot fail because you put all your savings into it and it has to work. It's a very different mentality. The venture is something you need to think big, act big, and if it works, it's extraordinary, and if it doesn't work, move to the next. Try to capitalize on the things you've learned and do it again. And I think we're training on that. We're training.
On to sports now. Looks like trouble ahead for Swiss tennis. One of Switzerland's most popular pastimes, with 900 clubs around the country, it was one of the first sports to come back after the coronavirus lockdowns lifted. However, the COVID-19 crisis continues to take its toll. President of Swiss Tennis, René Stammbach, tells Matt Layton his organization will take a deep financial hit. And as for major tournaments, he has his doubts. Let's take a listen.
René, so we've had some announcements by the Federal Council. Are things going to be back to normal in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I wouldn't say totally normal, but the situation is much better than before, because when they opened the possibility to play tennis on May 11th, that was a big step forward, because we have over 600,000 people playing tennis in Switzerland. Yeah. And it was high time that the courts were open, because the distances would have been kept without any problem, the 2 meters, and we were one of the sports who were really easy to start again.
There's 900 clubs in Switzerland. The blunt question: are they all going to survive?
Well, I would say yes. There's we have had some reactions from clubs who are really in big difficulties. As you can imagine, for example, in the canton of Ticino in southern Switzerland,
Yeah.
where the pandemic started very early, they had a lot of problems, and we are trying to mitigate things for them. We'll have a board meeting in 2 weeks to see what we can do financially to support them. But overall, I would say starting by May 11 is not that bad. We did an analysis going back about 25 years, and we saw that for weather conditions, there were 4 or 5 years where no one started to play tennis before May 15. So that's I think the clubs will survive. I haven't heard from members leaving the clubs in masses. That's not happening.
As a federation, you are the umbrella organization of Swiss tennis. You said you have 600,000 players. I believe you have about 53,000 licensed players. These are the people who bring the money in. Are you financially secure? Is the season secure?
Well, look, the whole thing started about 12 years ago when I started as president with proper capitals of about 4 million. We are at 11.8 now. Okay, well, so we have sufficient means to survive. But anyway, it's going to hit us hard. We are now counting to lose about 1.7 million on a 12 million budget of income. We have established a lot of mitigation factors to get down to a zero result, which we for sure will not achieve. Frankly said, we'll lose somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million this year. Right. We can survive, but I mean, as you mentioned, right, there's 53,000 people who take a license. Each license costs 70 francs, so that's an income of 3.5 million, and then the other 2 to 3 million income is also coming from the clubs. That's the basic fee for their courts and the club to be affiliated to the federation.
You have many hats, and one of them is you're vice president of the ITF. What are your thoughts on the Grand Slams? Are we going to see any this year?
Very good question. As to my information by now, I know that the French, and I spoke to their president, are planning to play without spectators. That's one of the options they have. I think they cannot postpone another time. As far as the US Open is concerned, they study the same scenario, but also a scenario where they would move later into the year to a place where you can play in November, like Indian Wells, for example, and they will announce, in my opinion, quite early what's going to happen. Personally, I doubt whether we will see professional tennis this year. There is also a rumor going around that ATP and WTA and also the ITF might consider to organize competitions by regions, because the problem is if we go back to the US Open, someone who wants to play the US Open probably has to go into the USA, coming from 210 different countries in the world, 2 weeks before the tournament starts because of the quarantine factor. But that means not that the 2 weeks are sufficient, because you have to practice before you play a Grand Slam. So that will mean they have to be there 3 weeks before the tournament itself starts. And in my opinion, that is highly improbable that it will happen.
Don't forget to catch up on all of our content online. cnnmoney.ch is the place, of course, and stay in touch with us via all of our social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.